Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Framed. My name is Ricardo McRae, and thank you for joining us today. Framing is a podcast where we explore ideas in context, and today we are framing the conversation around racial bias and its impact on Black lives and business. Joining me today in the blab, we have three awesome people. I'll start with Keita because he's on the top right now, on my screen anyway. Keita Deming is a new friend of mine, and he is a PhD candidate at U of T Boise. He is a firestarter, idea generator, provocateur, strategist, educator, and is the founder of TEDx Port of Spain, which is one of the top TEDx independent events globally. I'm also joined by Alicia Rose, a music lover, nonprofit professional, an advocate, community strategist, and managing director of Framework, and a board member of Cultural Pluralism in the Arts.
Movement Ontario.
Movement Ontario, that is a big one. And is also a CivicAction DiverseCity Fellow. And joining us, hopefully, everybody keep their fingers crossed, all the way from Germany, who is in traveling and is gracious enough to attempt to do this while on the road. Rinaldo Walcott, who is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Sociology of Social Justice and Education. And if he is able to come into our blog today, I am sure he will have lots to say. Rinaldo, he's trying to think. It's going in, it's going out. He said his internet would be shoddy, but we will roll and see what happens. Hopefully he can do it. So before we jump into this, I wanted to start with a short video by Jane Elliott. It's 1 minute long, and it speaks for itself. I don't know if too many people know who Jane Elliott is. She is an advocate to end racism. Basically, she's about 80 years old and a firecracker. So let's watch her for 1 minute. Okay, buddy. I don't know why that didn't work. That's why. Wrong link. Oh, sorry. Technical difficulties, but here we go again with Jane Elliott. If everyone clicks that, you'll be able to see the 1 minute video on YouTube.
Was in Trinidad is grounds for existential crisis. Is grounds for completely throwing everything you thought you know to be true
Right.
up in the air, upside down. And that is, like, I remember where I was. I was in the cafeteria of my university and being like things slow down. You're like, holy smokes, I am Black, but in a different way. Not how I've understood it my whole life. So yeah.
Alicia, when did you realize you were Black?
When did I realize I was Black?
Yeah. Have you even realized you're Black?
I don't.
Color is it in your mind?
I mean, I grew up here. I grew up in Toronto, West End. I grew up here. And, you know, I remember being on the playground as a kid, I guess maybe grade 2 or 3. I was one of the only Black kids in the school. And I was also, during that time, part of what they called the advancement program, which that was a terrible name and very ostracizing for a lot of reasons, but that's a side story. And so stood out in a bunch of different ways. And yeah, I mean, I would go home crying, being called nigger and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, had parents who really could have those tough conversations with me. But what it meant to be Black, as really seen by others wasn't something that I really kind of understood in a full scope until I left school. Like until I finished university and I was in the working world. And I realized that even the people that I rolled with and that were, you know, my friends and all of these things carried a certain bias, carried certain ways of looking at me, had different expectations of me than they had of other people. And I think that was around the time when I started to realize that the so-called otherness that we feel in this city, because to Keita's point, the experience is different all over the world, right? So the otherness that we feel here was not going to go away. So that was something that I had to kind of look straight on to and figure out, what is this about? How does this affect my day-to-day? How does this affect my interactions in personal and work and professional and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's though. As I was doing some research for this, I'm talking to people, watching videos, reading articles, and really, let me pause for 1 minute. Rinaldo, there's some people in the chat trying to help you with this, and they have a couple questions in whether or not you're on using Firefox or Chrome. For the last couple comments, we'll try and get you in. I've also made you a co-host, so that should help logging you in. So if you're on Chrome, that works best, and hopefully we'll be able to get you in the show. If not, you know, comments on the side, I'm sure will be very powerful. So, you know, when I was researching bias, it was really everybody has a bias. Black people have biases against black people have biases against white people, and vice versa. And everybody in between, gender, like everything. So when we start tackling, and that question that I'm asking around, what is the impact of that on people? What is the question I'm really trying to uncover here is, what is the financial impact on my life if people have low expectations of me?
Can I just add another thing to that?
No, you cannot add anything, Keita.
I'm going to.
Good. This is where we go.
What I find more dangerous is when we have low expectations of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So because other people have low expectations of us, we then internalize that, and we end up keeping ourselves back from taking opportunities that I see other people have no qualms about taking.
Right.
And I'm still waiting for like permission. I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me, hey, it's okay if you do this entrepreneurial thing that other people have no problem doing. So, but and going back to your bias, the thing that makes that hard is that we have biases about all kinds of things other than race. So in some ways, bias is helpful for the way we pass and understand the world. Mm-hmm. But then in other ways, it's not helpful at all because it marginalizes or it affects our decision making. And it is really, it's sort of that the last bit of work and the most difficult work we have to do when it comes to civil rights movements and like talking about how do we get civil rights, how do we get equity. I find that this is the part, the systemic, psychic stuff is the hardest piece to begin to unravel.
Right.
I think also, I mean, Ricardo, when you were talking about bias, you were saying, you know, bias comes in many forms. There's bias, black people against black people, white versus whatever. But the thing to remember with bias is a huge part of the problem with bias is not the bias against, but it's the bias for. So I am, you know, imagine me a white male running, I don't know, an arts organization.
Right.
Let's just say.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. Where that example come from.
And I'm looking to build and create people for my board and my executive director and my management team. And my bias is not necessarily on a conscious level against people of color. My bias is towards what I am comfortable with and who I am comfortable around and the culture that builds, right? Like people want to be comfortable around the boardroom table. They want to be comfortable around the management table. They want to be comfortable on the golf course if you still do that. So who do I bring into my fold that fits that imagery? And I find there's a lot of talk in a lot of different sectors about succession planning and how do we kind of diversify our next level of leadership. And particularly in Toronto, where it's so-called diverse. But we don't have a willingness to look at what leadership might look like that's different than us, right? So you might operate in a different
you have
way.
A vision in your head of what that leader is, and it's like, unless you you unconsciously looking for someone to be that 6'1" white guy, tall, blonde hair, slim, blah, 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 blah. Not even a fat white guy, just a slim, like you have to be over 6 feet. You're looking at someone a certain weight.
Even beyond that, you might be a woman that comes from a culture that is traditionally, and this is where stereotypes play a role again, but you traditionally is not shy, you're outspoken, you're aggressive, you're straight up to the point, and they might not look at that as something familiar. This is not the familiar package that we're used to seeing women in. This is not the familiar way that we're used to communicating with that. And so I'm not against her, but I am much more comfortable with him. And I think that is kind of a danger with bias, particularly in the workplace. Because we tend to have these conversations and bring people in to talk about diversity and inclusion. But when you're talking about inclusion, you're still talking about we're including you into our norm, right? Like we're still joining our basketball team as our basketball team has already been set up. So I think that's something to consider as well.
What do you think? Now, if anybody else has some thoughts or they want to leave a comment on the side, please do that. Or even jump in on a seat. I know Rinaldo is having some trouble coming in, but if you want to join the conversation or share a story, please he's free to jump in. Go ahead.
Verna Mayers, I think that's her name. She did a TED. Verna Mayers. She did a TED talk on bias. And one of the things she talked about was she had like slides of black men with background.
Right.
And saying, why do you think I'm showing you all these beautiful pictures of black men? Because I'm trying to change your framing. So, one of my issues is that if we always see images that don't look like us and don't represent us as leadership and examples of leadership, the bias gets affirmed on all levels. Get affirmed in us, and it gets affirmed who are already in the status quo. And
right. So we are affirming our own bias when we look at more images of people we expect to look like leaders.
Yeah, exactly. Some examples. I quite like this wave of black movies, black inspired movies or black directed movies, because we're beginning to see small changes in Hollywood. Very different representations of what the black body is, what the black body represents, what black person is.
Right.
And that's an incredible guys do experience, but yet they tend to homogenize it. And it does not help when. So the question I'm moving towards is whose responsibility it is to address the biases and educate people about the biases. And I think that's a very difficult question for us to answer. For some people, it would be radically, it's not mine. And for some people, it would be radically that it's only us who can be part of that education, because I do think we have to define ourselves in a world that comes with pre-definitions. And that's not easy.
So to that point, defining yourself in the world, does it matter more how you define or how the world defines you? I could define myself as like, yo, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm this, I'm that. But if the world sees me as somebody who can only be a criminal, how is that impacting my business? As soon as I show up, people are going to be like, hang on, there's that hesitation. I know, sweetie, it's a little hesitation. But it's okay. And that, I find, like, as a business person, I find that is a hurdle that I have to jump through time and time again. And I've been entrepreneur for over 12 years. Anybody can jump in.
I mean, I think it's both is critical. I think it's harder. You know, I'll speak from my personal experience. I found it harder to figure out who I am to myself versus how externally I was defined. It took me a long time to figure out that what those labels were outside is not what I had to internalize. And it's kind of an ongoing thing because it's so insidious. So it's not necessarily, you know, when I was younger, it was very obvious, right? Like when I was younger and I was in school, there were all of these labels and all of these ways that I didn't fit into a Black woman stereotype. So I got made fun of because I read a lot of books. I was whitewashed because I spoke a certain way. We all know this story, right? And that was very easy to kind of identify and define. As you get older, and particularly in the work context, in the professional context, these things and expectations are slipped in very insidious ways that you don't necessarily, you have to pull apart to say, like, where is that coming from?
So give me an example of how this slips in the last time you've recognized one of these.
Yeah, like where is this surprise?
I'm going to make him a bottle and come right.
Go ahead. Take care of him. I love him. You know, where is this surprise of my talent or skills or education or the way I speak in certain settings? Why is that a surprise to you? Like pulling apart these kind of expectations or lack of expectation around, you know, not expecting me to thrive in certain situations based on my packaging. That took a while longer to pull apart to understand where that bias was coming from, why people were labeling me and looking at me in certain ways. So I think it's necessary to have a very strong idea of who you are, your talents, your skills, what you bring to the table, but to understand what you're working with that's already at the table.
So so like Saturday, I got a zip car or like an auto share car, and I parked my bike on the pole right in front of it. And there were these little black kids playing there. And as I was driving off, I thought in my head, is my bike going to be there when I get back?
Mm.
And then because I was coming on this, I was like, wait a minute. If those were like white kids, would you have even had that thought? And I was like, dude, you just like projected the same thing that annoys the hell out of you onto these innocent little kids.
Right.
And it's a really hard thing to battle because you have to realize, wait a minute, the world is telling me one story, and I'm not only internalizing it, but I'm projecting it and recreating that violence. Right. So that I caught myself on the weekend and being like, man, this conversation is way harder to have, and it's way harder to deconstruct than we think because of how layered it is and how subliminal, how under the layer it is, because it's automatic thought. Like I was looking at these kids, they're like 4 years old, 5 years old, and I'm like, whoa, you know. So it's not.
And to me, these things are being reinforced. This notion of better than, somebody is better than someone else. Some skin tone is better than another skin tone. One sex is better than another sex. One job is better than, like, on and on and on it goes. And these things are being layered and reinforced through media. It's reinforced through jokes. It's like, I almost can't even go to a comedy club and enjoy myself. And I used to love comedy. And the more I understand and the more I read, I'm like, dude, like, that's funny, but it's not funny, dude. I'm like, it's like, I can't even, you know, I used to love listening to hip hop. And now I'm just like, I struggle to play that music because of the proliferation of the N-word.
Yeah,
I'm like,
hip hop and dance are particularly hard because you end up with misogyny, violence. You end up with like repeating certain sort of stereotypes around what it means to be black, what it means to be Caribbean. Like not everybody from the Caribbean is Jamaican, for example. Like that is something that we all have to. Like I just surprised you. I know that. But I mean, like I think about
Jamaica, just to be clear, so everyone's on the same page.
Yeah. Anyway, well, like I think about like Du Bois. Du Bois talked about W.E.B. Du Bois. He talked about how the 21st century, the color line is going to be the biggest problem for us to overcome in the 21st century. And like that's something that I remember the first time I read that line and being like, man, that stuck with me. And it was around the same time that I realized I was black, you know. So I'm reading Du Bois and thinking.
And when did Du Bois? What time frame was that? Like early 19? Is that?
Nah, he's like he's the first black graduate from Harvard, so he would have been. Oh man, early 1900s, I guess. No, he died in 70s something. Yeah, let me.
It could have been like the first half of the 19th century. Like we're talking South 1940, 1930. He's making that statement, and we are still grappling with that in North America, in Canada, in the Caribbean, anywhere black people are found around the world. And it's how do we begin?
But I gotta jump in.
Jump in.
I gotta jump in. Because we do this. We have this conversation about the landscape. Sorry, I'm hearing myself. I think Rico, can you mute? Let me try this now. Yeah, okay. So we do this. We have a conversation about the kind of broad landscape. And then we start pulling out the pieces to talk about, well, we're still look at hip hop, look at the kids these days, we have these conversations ad nauseum. And I'm not saying that these aren't important things to look at, but I feel like we often don't talk about the bigger constructs that we're working within. Like it's almost, I'm not a defeatist, but it's almost impossible to make the changes in these kind of narrow lenses when the broader landscape is still what it is. And I'll give you an example. So, and I said before we started, like my background is in arts and in arts administration. So that's something that I know very well. So that's where I draw examples from. But if we look at Toronto and we look at what is considered the big 6 arts organizations in Toronto, that make it a world-class city: symphony, opera, national ballet. Like these are the only exception, ROM, AGO, and TIFF. So the only exception that doesn't have a huge basis in like Eurocentric history is TIFF, and that's debatable when we look at the initial programming of TIFF before Cameron Bailey. And there are people doing great work in all of these institutions, like Sean O'Neill's killing things, Jesse Wente killing things. So it's not a knock on the people working there, but I'm talking about why are these Eurocentric institutions the ones that can make this city considered a world-class city? And then we look at people who are doing work that are ethno-racial focused. So you have, the Toronto Real Asian Festival and all of these things that are clamoring for funds. They're like begging for the scraps of funds and fighting each other for the scraps of funds and knocking Real Asian, I don't know any details about, but, knocking each other for not doing enough. But really the problem is up. The problem is not with each other. We're going to keep having these discussions about what we're not doing right. But the representation at the larger level, we're working within a framework that is almost impossible to change the systemic issues in each of these pillars.
I'd like to say that, just a second, to say on that, there's a hole in the bucket there, Liza. Like we keep throwing water in the bucket and discussing this thing, but we're not addressing the real problem, which is the system itself that we're actually trying to work within, which has this bleeding out of the back end because the system design is working perfectly.
Working as intended.
Exactly
how it was meant to.
So So I wanna pick up on that because most of these arguments go one of two ways. We blame the individual, which is that sort of neoliberal lens, or we blame the system, which is what we're doing right now. And I think both are right, and both have some meat to it. I don't see anybody ever handing over the power and admitting, hey, I'm comfortable. Hey, here's my cushion, so you are more comfortable. That's never going to happen. I just don't see that happening. I feel in some ways we have to begin to take that power and figure out how to take it. I talk about resisting gently, or resisting, like, I love the metaphor of the Trojan horse. That's the only way that's how I see this thing playing out. I don't see this thing playing out with nice conversations around, like, how am I ever going to convince somebody like Donald Trump that my life matters? Like, I'm never going to change his mind, ever. I'm never going to change his mind, hey, don't build a wall. That's never going to happen. I have to stake my claim in this system and play within the rules that they have. And hopefully we can change it. Like, you look in the US, you have a black president, and a lot of us came like, that was our messiah, that was our hope. There's a lot of debate about that, and to be fair, a lot of it has to do with the Senate. But it's these systems that are designed to keep certain people in power. Like in the US, they can't even do anything about gun control because of the way the NRA is set up. So we have to think about ways in which we stop blaming individuals and start changing the system. But it's the individuals who are going to change the system. So I just want to avoid the binary of putting, like, I definitely don't think it's individuals' faults, but I think we have to have the binary condition of the system is playing a role and people in the system are perpetuating the system. So like when I was looking at those little black boys and saying, look, I wonder if my bike is still going to be there, I'm perpetuating that system. And I have to recognize that and realize when I can give somebody a leg up. So I think we have to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah. And I think that I agree completely. I read this article today. I shared it with Ricardo.
Yeah.
Someone that I knew wrote an article called Lean Out. They wrote it for the Walrus. Actually, let me just see. I
have a link to it. I'll share it. Keep going.
Yeah. And it was a really interesting article, if not, I don't know how realistic it is. Because to your point, the article was really about people in power making space for those who don't currently own that power, right? So people of privilege stepping aside and giving space for others. And I love the concept of this article, like beautiful concept, but in the reality and the practice and the legs of it, to Keita's point, how many people are giving up their power? How many people
I know it's going to happen. I'm going to answer that.
How's it going to happen?
No, this might sound facetious, but the concept I think is there. So if you think back to the time of slavery, black people learned to read and write because the mulattoes, the kids who were mixed, learned to read and write in the house because they were house slaves. Those are the ones who helped us translate the amendment rights and help us understand that we had rights and taught other people how to read. So that's a big part of what happened. The biggest growing demographic in North America right now is mixed race kids. I think you're going to have a similar thing because there's going to become a point when I can't point to whiteness without pointing to myself. I can't point to blackness without pointing to myself. When you have those kind of demographics happening, where whiteness is disappearing and we can't figure out what whiteness is, it's going to change the system because the system itself is different.
Is it going to change the system? I mean, the system's been running good for 300-400 years.
No system stays on forever. They all collapse. Like there's no civilization that has. There's a point where it's going to collapse. And like, where's that going to come from? So I'm throwing my silly theory out there that I'm saying.
No.
That humans are going to mix, and I think it's in that mixing that we are going to begin to really understand the humanity of each other, because the empathy there, you can't deny when it's in your skin.
So we just
yes and no. I don't.
I think it's yes and no, but yeah, we could have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the system is going to change. It has to change. Like it has to. But will it just be more of a replacement? Will it just be more we will be having even more conversations about shadeism than we already are.
Right.
Is that what it's going to look like?
I'll tell you why I don't think it's going to change. And I think that because we elected a black president, we thought it would change. And the system has him handcuffed. And he is basically ineffective at actually doing anything significant to change the lives of black people because the system works very well and it doesn't matter who's running it.
I strongly disagree with you. Here's why.
I like it. This is why we're here.
Change happens slowly, number one. So like the expectation that somebody was going to become president and transform the US, the United States of America, was unrealistic to begin with. He was symbolic. The fact that there are people who are 9 years old, 8 years old, whatever age, and all they've ever known as a black president, that is revolutionary, as far as I'm concerned.
Right, it is.
And we're talking about Muhammad Ali just died this weekend. One of the biggest black revolutions we've ever had, like phenomenal human being, period. And like, I disagree with that because I think it's going to be people who understand our common humanity that are going to change the system. And one of my best examples for that is that companies today, we're talking about business and we haven't talked much about business, but businesses today are realizing that unless they have a moral or a purpose, millennials don't want to work for them. Millennials are going to move on. That is a serious HR problem. When you have the demographic changing, it's going to change how businesses work. Like a lot of companies, like when you have big oil companies thinking about how do we blow up our core business so that we can still be in the sustainability sort of space, that's a massive change. It's slow.
From money. Money is going to drive.
I think money and power is always going to drive things. Money and power will always drive things. But I think, so for example, I read like in Trinidad, we know from Trinidad that Trinidad's a small island, and what happens is that people who have money tend to be white or Syrian or Indian, and they tend to get their kids to marry other whites. But the mistake they make is they educate their children. They send their kids to the biggest Ivy League schools in the world. Those kids learn about equity, they learn sociology, etc., and they come back and are like, yo, this nepotism is nonsense. It has to stop. We can't continue to oppress others. And they have serious problems with the next generation because the next generation grew up with who? They played football with who? They played football with the very kids who are suffering under this oppression. And now they're growing up into power. It's a completely different thing. So I think...
Example of how that's actually on the ground changing today. Like I understand that concept, but I want us to continue to try and ground this conversation in like real life examples that people can get, bite this thing like a piece of fried chicken. I want this to be real instead of conceptual.
I'll give you an example. Like TEDx has been very, very middle class kind of event.
Right.
Topics that he's dealing with are national in scope. They're not class in scope. If you get what I'm saying. So it's really changing conversations in ways that I don't think you're going to see impact for a while, but it's going to come about. You have film festivals that are happening where people are really transforming spaces, and in terms of an educational space, film festivals are one of the best spaces to do that. It's a great medium for that. Like I can't knock TIFF or Hot Docs. Hot Docs and TIFF are doing some really, really good work. Mm-hmm. And to get into that industry, it takes you gotta have some support. Like it's not somebody who's hand to mouth who's doing that work. And I'm not saying that's exclusive at all.
It is exclusive, but there's a few $1,000s required to make the film.
The entry mark into that industry is high. The bar is high.
The bar is way down from where it used to be. It's still a few $1,000s. I mean, I was talking with this other film festival, West Indian Film Festival here in Toronto. My God, I can't believe the name is slipping me. But the name will come back to me. But they have a
Real
program.
World?
Sorry?
Real World?
No. And they have a whole program designed to specifically pull young people from marginalized communities and give them opportunities to make film and get them into a festival. Like they're actively, there's a whole program on it. Like we're partnering with them from Black in Canada to actually promote this thing and get people from different communities making films, seeing themselves as part of something, seeing representation, seeing that they belong there. And it's not like something other people do, but really getting that feeling that this is mine. I'm going to do something. I want to make a film and put it out there. And the bar to entry is still significant, because I think the biggest bar to jump over is not the financial one. Like, there are grants, people can get money, you can hustle, you can take a side job, you can make a couple grand and get yourself a camera and do something. But what we really have to focus on in shifting is our thinking. Like, the belief that I belong there to make a film is the biggest hurdle to jump over, not the price of the camera. The fact that I could have the camera and just, well, this is not a camera, but imagine this was my camera, and just realizing that the audacity to believe that I should make a film and it will be shown on a large screen, that's the hurdle. That sense of, as you say, growing up, seeing a Black prime minister and knowing that I belong there and I can do something, that is the hurdle. We are within this system. We have fish swimming in the water and we don't know we're in water. We're trying to describe it to ourselves, and it's just this. We are part of this, and we're trying to change it. And it is our responsibility, and we also have the impact of it. So it's this sticky thing to try and get put our hands on. But I keep coming back as I have these conversations to the mental hurdles that we have, our own biases against ourselves and against other people, that are really holding us back. So your mindset is setting everything. If I know where your mind is, I can tell you how you're going to live your life.
But I think there's other things. I agree, but I do think there's other things at play. So keeping kind of this example of the filmmaker going. So representation, absolutely key. Sense of belonging, sense that I can play in this space as much as the next person. All very key, all very important. At the end of the day, and because we kind of frame this conversation around business, you're also thinking in practical terms, your financial return. Just that a lot of filmmakers are doing it for the love and the passion. At the end of the day, you got to eat, you got to feed little babies like Keon. These things need to happen, right? So when you're looking at, yes, there's this great work being done, representing people in different ways. You can, post it on Vimeo and get out there. You can do it on a big screen. You can, I agree, Hotbox,
right.
Tiff doing amazing stuff. At the end of the day, they are getting paid less. The money they are receiving is less than their work. So people cannot survive in that space. That's the same. We're talking about the creative, and we're talking about people in business. We're talking about intersections and all of that. At the end of the day, if you're not being compensated in a way that allows you to live, then all of this passion, all of our work, all of this stuff that we're investing gets lost. We lose amazing, passionate people to playing a role somewhere, to taking on the token role, because at the end of the day, they're like, I just need to get paid and I need to eat. And I am not, and I'm not even trying to rock the boat once I'm in this industry. I'm
not rocking the boat. I just want my,
Yes, I'm not going to rock the boat.
I'm getting my food. I'm going to mess this up. But like, for example,
and how am I going to be mad at you for that? I can't be mad at you.
But like, let's talk about that. Let's go with that.
Young people today,
thought for a bit.
I want to make my money. So how do you address that? The financial aspect of like what I need to do to live, the basics of it. I need,
I want to go back to that conversation. So, for example, I don't know if how many of y'all saw that Common did a wicked freestyle,
Yes.
With Sway. I don't know if it was freestyle or not, but whatever. It was wicked. Like, the lyrics were insane. Point is, who's the highest paid female tennis player in the world right now?
Not Serena.
Exactly.
Sharapova.
But the point is that like that is exactly the systemic piece that you're talking about. And when people put in rules to help curb those things, you get a lot of resistance. And a lot of resistance comes because people don't understand the real impact that bias plays on the everyday life. So if I go in for a contract and I don't get it, did I not get it because I didn't do a good pitch, or did I not get it because of what Ricardo was talking about earlier, which is that everybody has an implicit bias to like people who are similar to themselves by values, religion, color, all of those things. Those things are true. So
what's up, Ken?
how do you know, how do you make that distinction? I do think you have to have that combination of changing hearts and minds and rules and regulations. It needs to be both. We need to do education. We need to get out there and do diversity training. We have to do implicit bias training. That's a big thing in police forces right now. I came off Facebook a couple months ago because I couldn't see another black person get shot. It was just ridiculous 3-4 months ago. I had to just come off social media because you get to a point where you're just like, dude, this is this is ridiculous, And when that became really hard for me, people on social media started to post things around lynching, and in my head, police shooting black people was the modern form of lynching, and that's when I came off Facebook. I was like, the minute I made that connection, I was like, I gotta get off this because I need to contain this anger. I need to be really calm with this stuff because I'll go out there and get mad at people, and that's not cool. So
and this is when we talk about the impact of racial bias, this is a huge chunk is just the mental well-being and mental health. And just going through trauma, dealing with this. I mean, I had the same thing. I had to get off all social media because I'm like, I can't, this is too triggering for me, and I'm crying. I'm coming home, I'm reading this, and I'm crying, and I can't function.
Right.
So when things like this are happening, we are losing people who, and I don't mean losing forever, but you're losing people who can make impact and strides in certain areas because we're carrying too much of the struggle by ourselves. We're having these conversations.
But that's a myth. That's a myth that we bought into. We're not by ourselves. That's a lie that we believe. We're not by ourselves.
Okay. Talk to me more about that.
3 of us are in this chat room. We're not by ourselves. We're not going through this struggle.
But this is when I say by ourselves, this is what I mean. Look at this chat room. We already are all on. We've already drank the Kool-Aid. There's nobody in here that we're like, hey, here's the Kool-Aid. No, literally, this is serious, and this is not a.
Okay, but
this is not saying.
But I honestly believe it's usually been a small group of committed people who've made a difference. If you volunteer for any event, it's usually a small group of people who are doing the work, and everybody else is there for the charades and the goodie bags at the end. But
sure, it's the triumph, not the struggle. No,
but I do think the lie that we've been told that we are in this alone is part of the colonial legacy that we have inherited. So they tell us that we need to survive on your own. If you partner with this person, you will get beaten, you'll get strokes, etc. And I think that we still have that thing. We have to get. There are communities that come together because they strive. If you in Toronto here, you go down DVP, a community of 100,000 people have the Aga Khan Center, which is one of the biggest, a 7-acre piece of property, a religion. They have a population of 100,000 people in Toronto. But somehow they've been able to put together a 7-acre piece of place that says, we are here, we are community, this is our community.
Right.
Why aren't we doing that?
Well, because
but what I'm saying is, though, when I am going to work and I am in an organization that is primarily white people around me, I am seen as the diverse person. I didn't know I was diverse. I just thought I was black. I just thought I was
You're
black.
You're a diversity expert in the room
because,
because, oh my God, that's it.
I represent all things diverse.
Alicia, that's what you have to. You know what we all collectively will let her know, and she will report on our behalf.
Right. So then I automatically become the diversity police,
Right.
And so let's see, are we representing people properly here? How can we better include this group? Talk to Alicia. She knows stuff about this.
Yeah, you know this.
Yeah, bring Alicia in on this. And so when I say we're carrying it ourselves, I don't necessarily mean as a group of the so-called conscious set or any of that.
Right.
I'm saying when we are out there in our day-to-day lives, it tends to fall on our shoulders to be the representation of something much larger than ourselves. And that cannot come without stress and pressure. So you're owning that all day or night, whatever you work. You're owning that experience unless you actively push that away.
So Alicia,
that I completely agree with. Here's a question.
Yes.
Will any of this change if white people don't get involved?
Say it again.
Will any of this change if white people don't get involved?
We'll make it change.
We got to get enough for them to get to understand. We got to get This is the question I had for you. The question I had, and I asked it early on: whose responsibility is it to educate about systemic oppression? Whose responsibility is that to educate about that, particularly people of color? And that's the definition of a wicked problem. A wicked problem is the owner who owns that problem is incredibly ambiguous. And I think we have to take that mantle, unfortunately, and be part of that educating process and let other people who are white and have power to then begin educating on our behalf. Until we are doing that, we are just another field slave kicking up a fuss. That is what we are. I think that's the bottom line. Because slavery, civil rights, all of those things, the key players, as far as I read the history and understand social movements, is that the key players were white gatekeepers who opened gates of blacks. That is how I understand it.
Well, that whole idea has been part of just about every movement in modern history, or even like anybody with power has to start. The people with the power have to start joining the resistance. Like when you're talking about having women in politics, it's men who have to say, you know what, come, take a seat here. It was because there were no women in there.
Justin Trudeau making his splitting the parliament.
The first woman to run a marathon had to be surrounded by her husband and 5 guys. Pushing people away to knock them out of the way so she could run that race.
Right, exactly.
One was her husband, and there were like 4 friends that she trained with. Now, you don't know the names of those guys, but those guys physically showed up and made a difference so that she could just finish the race so that people can go, oh shit, woman can run. Before that, they thought your uterus would fall. So
there are two things I want to point out. One is that you have to be the positive deviant. So you have to be willing to be that deviant. So which is, she went outside of the rules of the system and showed and demonstrated that this is possible. That's one of the things that came there.
Right. She played.
She had
and bent them as much as she could. She didn't break them.
She broke the rules. Women were not allowed to run at all. That's breaking the rules.
She put her name down. Her name was, I think, like.
But she was a woman and ran. Like she was a woman and ran.
Robin Jones,
she broke
a man or a woman, and she
broke the rules. There's no. She broke the rules. She broke the rules. Maybe I forget my second point now. But you had to be willing to be that positive deviance, and I think demonstrate that another option is possible. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the times I think we become self-defeatist and we lose our condition of possibility, our sense of another condition is possibility. Right. And that is part of the struggle, is that knowing that this, what I know now and the realm of what I know as possible is bigger than this. So for example, little Caribbean boy grew up in the Caribbean, etc. You move to Canada, all of a sudden, your possibilities open. You're like, whoa, the world is a bigger place. Mm-hmm. You understand? You move the first time you go to Europe and you take like a train from like England to Holland or something, or Spain or whatever. You can't do that in the Caribbean. You can't do those kind of things. All of a sudden, your mind is expanded, and we have to. That's why we need poets and artists and those kind of people to dream for us. Like movies like Avatar, as problematic as it is, should have chose a better example.
Come again.
Should have chose a better example.
This for a second. Let's just do another. Let's do another.
Was that? I don't know. Anyway, but Peter Pan. I don't know. That's even worse. Oh my god. But movies that like encourage us to dream. That's my point. Like we need those artists to help us dream of, and then bring that to reality. So then you have those people like the outliers, the positive deviants, like the runner you were just talking about. You need to have those people, and then people begin to change the rules. Then people begin to realize, and you need those men who protected her. Like without those men, she couldn't finish that race. I remember that footage. Somebody tried to pull her out of that race. As far
that was the creator of the race. He's like, get out of my race, and there's like
like woman, and then like there's that classic image of like a white guy throwing acid in a pool because black people were in it. It's a classic image.
Right.
Like until white people were like, "Are you nuts?" Those things didn't change.
Right.
So, I think what we're talking about is like Stokely Carmichael was. I read something he wrote about organization versus mobilization, and how they often work sometimes against each other, because you're having like the Nat Turners who are like, fuck it all, let's just take everyone out, and then you have the Barack Obamas who are like, let's get in there and let's get into the system and let's make change within it. And how there's been a history of these groups not working well together. So you have in Toronto, you have this Black Lives Matter movement happening, which is, well, you could shake your head, but it is a space.
I'm gonna go there. I'm glad you're going there. This is good.
No, I'm going there because I am amazed by these young people. These are very young people who are already dealing with layers of marginalization. These are not just Black, these are not just women. These are women of LGBT. Like, this is like
as marginalized as you can
marginalized as you can, with the exception of maybe Indigenous. Like, this is as marginalized as it gets.
Indigenous groups. I was just like,
right? And so you have this group who is doing work, mobilizing. Whether you agree with everything they do or their methodologies, there's mobilization there. And then you have groups that I've spoken to who are organizers in this space who want nothing to do with that group because, well, look at them and they're a hot mess and they're all of this. And I feel like if we can, and that's what led me to Stokely Carmichael's
article
writings on this, because I'm like, there must be a way that we can better connect these groups, so we're not taking over the space of those, kind of mobilizing, but that we're better supporting and that we're better kind of using the skills and the connections that we have.
So how is that different from? Remember I was talking about earlier that the illusion that we are alone. So, like for example, I think a lot of people underestimate how much Malcolm X and Martin Luther King had backdoor conversations and understood what the two of them were actually working together, but appeared to work apart because they understood the image that they were trying to. Right. They understood what they were doing.
There was a bigger picture.
So the reason I was shaking my head was because I have tried to reach out to that Black Lives Matter group, and I have a white wife. Done. You done. Like, they would just flick me away. I'm gone. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I just thought there were some really simple ways that they could have.
Was that said to you?
No. But
okay. No, I just
to them as well. Nothing.
I didn't have to say it.
Okay. No, I was just curious.
Several times reach out to them. I've invited them on this show, and I haven't heard it.
It was clear. It was clear.
I'm not making.
But my point is that I think. So, for example,
times.
Ricardo, you talk a lot about social media. One of the missed opportunities I thought with that group was that there was a period of time when all of Toronto loved that group. They could have leveraged social media to get people with resources to donate and support that cause. Yeah. And it was in the heat of that moment that I was trying to say, hey, those things are really easy to do and set up. But when you go around, they're still passing around baskets. They're still passing around this. They had an Indiegogo thing to support their school, which is like, anyway. and I just couldn't. I didn't know who to talk to, and I tried, and like I didn't, and maybe I didn't talk to the right people, but I tried my thing and saying like, you know, and it didn't go anywhere. And my issue is that it goes back to, I think, lack of collaboration and lack of our community understanding that until we are all in this together, we are going to be these separate peoples who are going to be continue to be subjugated. I find that until we figure out how to work together, understand that our struggles are united,
right,
we are in deep trouble. And I like the example of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Very, very different messages. And Stokely Carmichael, I think he's the one who also said that, like, this is where I'm saying things I shouldn't say. Like,
come on, safe.
Like, you know how people talk about like peaceful demonstration and all that. I'm not a fan of that. There's a time for peace and there's a time for violence. Look back into the US again. A lot of those so-called riots happened when people started to loot. That's when they got any news. Before that, they had like peaceful demonstrations talking about like who was getting shot, etc. And as soon as they started to break shit, CNN is all over that shit. So sometimes, I'm very sorry, you cannot go with a peaceful demonstration. I find the peaceful demonstration is just fits into a certain mold that people find convenient, and we can talk about it in civilized manners and while we drink our tea. But as soon as you start to break shit, people get scared, and that's what has to happen. Like, you have to know which tactic to use when, we don't talk about that. Right. When do we work together? When do we appear to work apart? But we have to be always working together. When are we positioning ourselves as like we're fighting against each other, but really we're together? The Muslims and the Christians worked together in the civil rights movement, and that was just to end overt racism. Now we have to work to end systemic racism and psychological racism, which is hard as hell.
And to your point, there is this, it's not a new narrative, but it's seeing more legs, is this policing how to manage our outrage, policing how to express our concerns, our need for change. So there's this policing around, well, you could demonstrate, but you don't need to riot, or you could have a talk, but you don't need to use.
No, but worse than that is the self-policing. Like, yes, we police ourselves, and then other people police us. That piece, and then there's the whole thing. Like, I don't know how to describe this, but like there's something about when we begin to express our anger, we fall into the stereotypes of what a black person is, particularly men who are in violence, who are doing violence. You just become a thug. And that is just the perpetuation of existing stereotypes and continues that bias. And that is a very difficult thing to do. When a black woman gets on that stage and she's strong, she's angry black woman. Beyonce, Lemonade, angry black woman. Right. She just did one of the most.
People have to be contained and controlled and put together and stoic and forgiving of people who are doing things to us is
for us.
Like, not being able to express anger and frustration as a full spectrum of a human being, and just saying, no, your expression has to look like this because it's convenient for me to digest as a white person. I'm comfortable when you sit here in this little box. And it's just like, listen, when did my life and my expression become something that you are policing? But
the repercussions are real. Like, the repercussions, when I told people that I was coming to do this talk, 3 separate people said to me, okay, be careful what you say. Like, could this affect your work? Like, could this affect your job?
Yes.
Contract work? Will this affect, like, the people who are going to hire you? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know.
Yes, it's
out here already, so might as well do it. But the repercussions, I'm in a position where I can shrug that off. I'm in a position, I'm not rolling in anything, but I'm in a position where I feel comfortable and safe enough that I'm like, I'm going to say what I want to say, and I'm not going to be out on the street next month because I can't pay my bills.
You see
not everyone has that privilege. Not everybody has that level of comfort around it. So
Everybody will come
speaking
in this
out,
lab and see what
having
they have
these
to say.
conversations.
There's people up here who are watching. I'm like, come on in, join in, say something. And I'm like, it's open. Nobody's jumping in because of like that is more of the, as I see it, of that policing of ourselves. Like we are like, well, we never know, massa might be coming.
Okay, so let me bring this back to a business analogy. So
Back.
the first set of people who invested in environmental technology were usually nonprofits and scientists, schools, energy, etc., etc. Those are the people who figured out how to make solar power work. It was expensive. There was zero return on investment. That's you call that curve, that like upward sloping curve.
Drop.
Businesses start to like enter when? When do businesses start to enter? Businesses start to enter right as it starts to get profitable. But the martyrs who went first, they just watch you spend your money, take your risk, da da da. As soon as the return on investment start to get good, yeah, let's start to put our money in. They don't put in that early investment. One of the reasons pharma does really well is because they know that if they put that money in certain treatments, they're going to get their big return on investment. So what is happening in our context is, because the risk of speaking out is high, there are people who are going to watch until you get to that point when the return on investment is worth them coming in. And it's the same analogy that you use in business that you could use in this race context.
Very true. Well, how do we
Drop the mic.
Just
drop the mic and walk away.
It's like, I'm done with this blab bullshit.
I told you I was going to say stuff I ain't supposed to say.
You're supposed to say, man. Well done, man. Well done. So how do we increase the profitability of resistance? Like, how do we make this so that people want to invest outwardly? Now, there's a difference between supporting quietly and sending private messages to Ricardo and everyone here and saying, oh, I love what you're doing. Keep it up. Great work. I'm like, no, dude, I need you to share this on your Facebook wall. I need you to be public with it. Like, so come out here.
I think there is real investment. There's real business opportunity in being smart about how you are resisting. So, for example, there are a lot of studies coming out about how diverse teams perform higher, perform better, etc. You're beginning to get the science to back you up on that front. One of the biggest injustices that we are going to see coming forward is going to be environmental injustice. There is massive money to be made within the environmental sector. Online tech is liberating and giving people voice in a way that is absolutely phenomenal. Just before we came on this, I was watching Naomi Klein using Facebook Live, and I was thinking, yo, if you wanted to, you could start a news network on Facebook Live. Easy. If you just said, hey, every at 6 p.m. we're going to give community news and we're going to use Facebook Live. There are ways to make this a difference. We just have to think about how do we use the technology and use it smartly. I think it's definitely there. There's lots of potential, financial potential. We just have to be willing to take it up.
This is why I love this notion of blab and just being able to join on, like we are wherever we are in the world. We could just get on here and have this conversation. And of course, I'm going to download it and put it up on places and share it and spread it everywhere else. And I'm using those technologies that are available to say, I'm going to create my own news. I'm going to create the conversation I want to see. I'm going to spread it. And to hell with you and your news. I don't even have a television because that's how much I don't want that nonsense permeating my brain. It's like there's enough in there. I need to get it out. So it's, how do we encourage more people to do this? To like get on platforms, get on Facebook Live, get on Blab, get on Twitter, like something, share it, tweet it. Like,
yeah, but you need to do more than like and share. Sorry.
Yeah, and I also think there has to be, in the spirit of looking at ROI, we really have to create platforms and pause in our successes, because if there's no point where we're looking at things and saying like, you know what, that was really successful. We all spoke out about this, or we all addressed a specific issue, and this is what happened. Then we don't actually understand what our voice can do. So when I would mentor kids at Pathways to Education, right? And I was actually going to say this earlier, so I'm going to go on a tangent and then come back. And you're just going to have to go with me because that's what's happening.
Drop your mic.
So the number one thing around representation, I remember when I was, working with some youth at Pathways to Education, and I mentioned to them that in a conversation about something else, I mentioned that to them that my mother was a doctor. It had nothing to do with her profession. It was like, oh, my mom's a doctor, blah, 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 blah. And 6 of these girls were like, what are you talking about? You mean your mother's a nurse? I was like, nope, she's a doctor.
Full on doctor.
Like a real doctor? She's not a real doctor. And I'm looking at this like, this is where we are still. I have to have this conversation with these young people about the fact that, yes, my mother is a doctor. Yes, like Dr. Dre is a doctor. And the fact that I am so immersed in, I don't know if it's called an activism lifestyle, but I'm so immersed in these conversations that I forget sometimes that we are actually, in many ways, not as far as I think that we are. There are still kind of the conversations to be had around, never mind trying to get you to share stuff and, fight system and fight the power and all of that kind of stuff. You're still in the space of like, and I shouldn't say still because that sounds like back, but you're in the space of not understanding your potential and your possibilities. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes we have to kind of take a step out of ourselves and realize where everyone is in this space and in this game. And on top of that, when we're trying to encourage people to speak up and speak out, it's human nature. You want to join a winning team. Right. Nobody wants to join the underdogs. I mean, maybe I do, but it's not the mantra. So people want to also hear about, yes, these are the struggles and these are the things that we have to speak up against and fight. But these are some of the ways that we've won, and these are some of the ways progress has been made by this specific campaign or these specific issues, or bringing this specifically to City Hall. What does that look like? And I think we don't do that. We're kind of like right on to the next thing because there are so many damn things to look at.
So how do we begin to chronicle that success and that winning as we have these series of small wins leading up to change?
My friend has a great website called Back in Canada.
Oh. I love the plug. Thank you so much. But we've had tons of conversations about this. This is really the reason that I do that. It's just any of this. It's just, I'm going to create my own news and I want to tell you what I think is important, and to hell with your opinion about it. It's like, we're going to profile Black excellence and that's it. Like, come on in, eat it up. It's free. Enjoy it. And the number of emails that I get from people saying, oh my God, this changes my life. I open this website every day when I show up at work, and I get my daily dose of like goodness of who I am and what I'm like.
But here's the danger.
I should publish these emails one day. There's tons of them.
But Ricardo, here's the danger, and here's my cynic side.
Danger. Let me go with the danger.
How do we stop talking to the converted, to people who've drank Kool-Aid? Because that's the audience, right? Like, we could start our own TV stations, etc. But the reality of social media is that because of the way social media works, we're getting more and more siloed. So yes, very few people will actually go out and say, I'm going to look for somebody and have a conversation with somebody I fundamentally disagree with. Some of the most fascinating spaces are spaces like where you have Arabs and Jews having real conversations. That's the kind of thing I'm interested in. I'm interested in, like, how do we create spaces where people have a Donald Trump, like, I didn't watch it, but I think they did a thing where they had Donald Trump believers or supporters watch the eye of Bernie Sanders or Clinton Democratic supporters, watch their eyes for like 2 to 3 minutes. You just had to watch them, watch each other in the eyes. They did that. I didn't watch the video, but I just imagine that's the kind of shit that we need if we're going to make this happen. Going back to, we have to figure out a way to engage with the other and engage with the other in a real way.
And it starts with two things, something you said and something Alicia said about building momentum. And this is what we do in Wedge 15, and this is what I do in my business. How do we get people to change? How do we get people to shift their behaviors and thinking and ideas? Like, this is all I double down on every single day. And it starts with the people who drank the Kool-Aid. It always starts with those people. So you talk to people and you start to 2, 3, 4 of you. How do you start this movement? It's like 2, 3 people making something happen. Malcolm X is going to talk to Martin Luther King. Gauguin is going to speak to Vincent van Gogh. They're going to hang out. Both of them are going to change the art world. Like these people, Tupac knows Biggie. Like they hang out together. And those two people start to have these types of blab conversations. And then people join. 5 more people see. It gets a little more stuff. And then it starts to become a movement. Then more people start to come out of the woodwork. Then you start to get a bit of critical mass. And then you're able to actually engage with people who have dissenting voices. We're saying, no, what you're doing is wrong. It's like, okay, now that we have a bit of a cushion, we have some stability with this, now we can start to engage with people who are different. But you can't start with 2 people pulling in different directions and expect it to work.
Yeah, I think, okay.
All I want to say is I wish I'd watched that Trump thing, because I think you can start there. It's a matter of process. And once you process, then you get people to get there. So if I remind you of our common humanity, prior, like they've even talked about this in implicit bias studies. If I remind people of our common humanity, implicit bias goes down after reminding people about the common humanity of that person. If you don't do that piece around reminding them of the common humanity, implicit bias stays the same or goes up. So I think it's a matter of process. It's a matter of figuring out what is the process that can be incredibly risky, that can get people into a similar space. You can't, for example, there was another beautiful thing this week on Facebook. Like they tested the genes of people. They did Ancestry.com with people.
Oh, yeah.
And like, exactly. And then all of a sudden, everybody's like, what's the one country you hate? And there's one chick who was like, Turkey. Girl, that's not need to not call women chicks. So many bombs. Man.
I'm glad you said something, because
so many bombs. People watching, man. But the girl who was like, she said she didn't like Turkish people, and then finds out that she's part Turkish. And like, that's the kind of thing that I think that in that moment, you can't tell me she hates. She started in oppositional. 2 weeks later, she's like hugging her cousin. That's what that video showed us, right? So
it takes a DNA test, 2 weeks, and a scientist and a TV program to have her move half an inch.
Dude, that wasn't half an inch. She went from hating Turkish. That wasn't half an inch.
Yeah.
But that's not sort of scalable when you deal with my life and walking outside to the bank to make a deposit and somebody thinking I'm trying to steal money. Like, how do you begin to scale that? Like, that is wonderful and that's beautiful in that instance. And yes, it does work. But what about the scalability of that? How do we get that to be in a little school in Alabama and also Alberta and downtown Toronto and also up in Red Deer? Like, how do we do that?
There's 2 things here. One is the acknowledgement that most people, like I'm seeing in the comments here, Kente.
Jump in, Kente. Let's hear what you got to say, man. You're like, you gave up on trying to change people.
I gave up on trying to change people. I focus on the enlightened. And that is I do that a lot, because honestly, like there's times when you're just like, this shit is too hard right now. I just need to talk to someone and feel sane. I need to talk to people, I need that right now. So I think it's like a very real thing that we have to acknowledge. And also that we are now, because of a whole bunch of things, social media just being one element of it, the extreme conversations are like the thing to do now. Like, as extreme and as out there as possible is what's like the sexy thing now. Like the idea of having conversations where you're like, you know what, I disagree with that, but here's this and here's that. It's so unusual when you look at, and I think it's not to get into it's the media's fault because chicken or the egg, but when you're looking at all the demonstrations of conversation, which are just like to the most ridiculous, like, do you disavow the KKK to like, you know, Bernie Sanders, like it's, we're dealing with such extreme representations that are, even if they're American, they're a part of our Canadian context because we are so bombarded with American media. But it's like, how do you shift how conversations happen? And then also empower or give space for people to have enough energy to want to talk to people and have these discussions outside of the converted. It's a lot. I'm tired already.
I can't even think.
Take a nap.
But I want to wrap this show up at 7:27. I want to wrap this show up in about 2 or 3 minutes. Come on, Kente, jump in here. You don't even talk to the people, the dissenting voice anymore. You're done.
Well, no, it's not that. Is that my thing is like this. Some people, no matter what you do, they're not gonna budge because it's ingrained into them, and they're gonna have to have their quote unquote wake up call for them to see the light. And to be honest with you, you turn blue in the face dealing with people like that. So, you know, like I said, bless you for doing that. I call that God work. I think at this point in my life of years of doing that, I'm a leave it to the fine people like yourself to do that. And I was always, you know, my thing is you find you a good group of people who are there already, and then you guys build together. And to be honest with you, if you go back to the civil rights movement, it wasn't every black person wasn't involved in that. It was a few, and they made, you know, big changes. And you think of all the major groups when it comes to us, there were a few. There were very few people that were involved in those groups. And the few will make up for the many. So, you know, like I said, I mean, you know, I don't knock anybody for doing that. Me personally, I'm a lead that to people like you who are patient, because I'm just not patient. You know? And I've done that. You know, I come from an activist family. Activism has always been a part of what I did. You know,
Black Planet on your wall.
That's right. Fear of a Black Panic. Great record.
Love that.
Yeah. So, you know, but like I said, I don't knock people for doing it, but I just don't.
I got a question. So, like, I think one of the threads that has been coming through this conversation is that we need to remember that change doesn't happen with one thing. It happens with a series of things. So, like, it's a combination of things that make massive changes happen. That's one. When you look at the civil rights movements, it's easy to look at and say, like, yo, the 60s was a time of revolution, etc. Those seeds were planted in the 1920s, 1910s, 1800s, right? But we have to keep planting them seeds and putting fertilizer and hoping that they grow. So whether or not you, like, I understand you don't have the patience, but, like, that patience is all we got. Other than that, without that, we don't got strategy. There's a indigenous group in Hawaii. These folks, when I heard the story, I was like, there's like Maori warriors. In order to get back their land, you know what they did? They nominated a whole bunch of young people and said, yo, you're going to become a lawyer, you're going to become a sociologist and go into the university, you're going to start a cleaning company, you're going to do this. They had a 60-year plan. 60-year plan. They started a cleaning company, won all the government contracts. And while at night, what they were doing was stealing all the proof that the land belonged to them. A 60-year plan, homie. That's what them people was doing until we could figure out how to do that kind of shit. Sorry. We have to.
No, I agree with you.
We have to get together. We have to get.
I agree with you, but you're talking about the enlightened though. That was doing
that.
About
enlightened too. You talked about how it's a small group of people, and
group of people. Right.
The difference between like making an organization and mobilizing. They were mobilizing what mattered. Like like nobody's business. And I'm saying, like we made a point earlier, we have to figure out how to do that as Black people. We have to figure out what are the things we need to steal at night that give us our power. That's what we have to figure out. Until we figure that out, we will continue to have blabs like this and go home and drink some. I would take a shot after this and I'll be cool and be like, yo, that was cool, and we just jerk each other off and then good. But until we do that,
I don't jerk off. That's not my thing.
Oh, sorry.
I don't have to jerk off. But what I will say, is
end that conversation.
I'm a believer that we obviously need to go past the converted. But sometimes these conversations are provide more information and provide the tools and sometimes the equipment for those people who are doing God's work.
Wait.
As Kente will say. So what I'm saying is there are people that I talk to who would never come and have a conversation in a public sphere like this.
Right.
It will never happen, no matter what I do. That will not happen. But will they come to me and step to me with some knowledge that I knew nothing about? Will they come to me with some paper? The Stokely Carmichael thing I was referring to came from someone that I know. Like, will they come to me with something that I can use in my toolbox? Because I'm like, let's just do this. Let's just get out there.
Yeah.
So I think everybody has a purpose, and I do think everyone has a role. I don't want us to start focusing on why other people aren't doing more, and as opposed to how can we better utilize where they're going.
Teacher pick me.
Yeah, you.
I think this is when I lost you when I went offline. But one of the best insights I ever had was I was arguing with somebody about rights to abortion, and this kid was like, abortion is wrong, and I was like, women should have choice. And we had this whole big argument. And then somebody came to me and was like, I don't know why you waste your time with people like that. And I was saying to him, like, you know why I waste my time? Because I was using him as a prop to lay out a reason, the argument for why abortion was okay. I wasn't speaking to him. He was a prop, a prop in my education tools. Other people reading it were quite messaging me, you know what, I've never heard the argument like that. That makes so much sense. So when you're arguing with that person, what you're doing is laying out your case. That person is just serving as opposition for a different agenda. And we have to understand those kind of things. So the people who are feeding you that information are part of that struggle. So they're part of educating the masses. So when it is really time to mobilize, enough people are educated and understand why this is important, why we need to hit the streets and decide when to be peaceful and when to be bad. Like, it's just, and that was, I think you were talking about that before, and then I missed that. But I think that is really, really an important piece that we missed. We missed, like, when those people who are willing to go out there, what they're doing is they're doing education in a way that is reaching people. Like Common, when Common spit them verses last week, Common was dropping education on people. That's no joke, you know? Understand that. Like, those poets, we need those poets.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to multiple packaging, multiple people. Some people are going to be behind the scenes and busy. Some people are going to be out the front punching people in the face. And the full spectrum of everyone in between, from working in the system to like, fuck the system, I'm going to be out here doing my thing. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have this full 360 view. It's not, nobody's right. And there's no one person.
Well,
well, everybody is actually right, but everybody else is out to lunch at this point. But you end up with everybody's actually required. Like, you need that person to be quiet, pulling that information. You need somebody stealing that stuff at night. You need somebody out there raising a ruckus on television, on Facebook, and doing an argument, so that the sum effect of all of that is that we actually move the dial forward in some sort of way. I would personally like to see it a little more organized, and a little more structured and connected so we can move faster, but that's just what I want. But I think this is going to be a good start. It's now 7:36 to wrap up this lab. I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about in the after show. But I wanted to say
after show.
Are there outtakes?
Blab is always there's always an after show.
The show gets better than the show.
This is I'm losing my blab virginity today, so I don't.
You will never be the same, my friend, after tonight.
Yeah. Never be this close again.
So I want to say thank you to Kita for joining us, Alicia, and also Rinaldo, who tried to get in from Germany but couldn't because of internet connectivity. Everybody should follow them on Twitter. Any big projects or anything coming up that you want people to know about? Kita, Alicia?
No, I don't have any big projects I want to talk about. Not yet.
I know you've got stuff cooking, so you're not telling people about it. Alicia, what's next for you? How can people be in touch if they want to hear more from you?
Just connect with me on Twitter. I have some projects that I'm working on that I'm not prepared to speak on in the public sphere as of yet. But
it's cooking. It's cooking. Yeah.
And if you want to connect with me, my name is Ricardo. You can find me on Twitter at Ricardo McRae. We'll put it on the side. Thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Framing, and we will see you next time.